Hello, this is Dr. Anthony Delmond. We've been talking about prospecting methods, and before we move on to qualifying prospects, we need to spend a little bit of time talking about how to choose the appropriate prospecting method. The answer really is that it's situation specific. So we could think about an appropriate prospecting method for a bunch of different examples. I've got a list here. For example, a small farm trying to promote its products at a local farmer's market, the best way to go might be social selling, where they're able to put information out on the internet freely so that followers can find it or link to other people who might be interested in the product. Sales rep for Bayer trying to expand the customer base for a new seed variety might be worthwhile to do some networking, might be worthwhile to put some information out there on social media, again another cheap method, but also reaching out to existing customers to find referrals might be a good way to go. There's a lot of different options for this. If you're talking about a graphic designer who's trying to help small restaurants in a rural area expand their markets, obviously this is that customer to business model that we talked about before, and the best route to go here might be actually doing some cold canvassing and walking around to restaurants and trying to figure out if they're interested in buying the product. A large tractor manufacturer trying to find more retailers to carry their equipment. This is again going to be probably a cold calling type of situation where you reach out to those specific individuals who might be likely to carry your equipment. So reaching out to individual retailers in certain areas. And lastly, a metalworks company trying to sell their parts to industrial buyers. You wouldn't want to do anything like social marketing, social media marketing, because obviously industrial buyers are not groups that are looking for places to buy on social media. So this might be one where, again, you want to call directly, or you could even choose to visit in person. So you really want to think about how you go after prospects depending on your particular business. So is prospecting important? Well, obviously it's somewhat important considering you won't have any buyers if you don't do some prospecting. So it's crucial, especially at the beginning, but continuous prospecting is also important to reduce the impact of churn. What is churn? Well, routinely, buyers will leave your list of clients. For whatever reason, maybe maybe they go out of business, maybe they've changed what products they're using. It could be no fault of your own, or it could be the fault of your company. But regardless, you're always going to have some percentage of your customers who are leaving. If you don't prospect continuously, then you have no one to fill those gaps. If you continuously prospect, then you're going to replace those customers instead of losing them entirely forever. Since it takes a while to go from a prospective client to a client, to reduce lost income, you want to make sure you have some prospects in your back pocket. So continuing to prospect is a good idea even if you're very established. And the best salespeople will agree with that. All right, let's talk about qualifying prospects. Salespeople have to assess every prospect's probability of becoming a customer, and this is called qualifying prospects. Every qualified prospect should satisfy the BANT criteria. There's a bunch of criteria that we could talk about, but the one I like is BANT. And that means that the prospect has the available budget, they have the money to be able to make a purchase, they have the authority to make a purchase decision. That means they have the power within their business to decide whether or not they can purchase something. They have to have a need for the product being sold. If they don't need the product, they're not going to be likely, even with the budget and authority, to purchase it. And they have to have the appropriate timeline to make a purchase. A lot of the qualification models ignore this timeline, but you could have the budget, authority, and need for a product, but not need it at that very moment, or not have the right situation at that time to make the purchase. So the timeline is also very important. It's crucial to qualify prospects ahead of time to avoid wasting time on prospects who are not qualified. So when you make a sales call and you actually go out and make your pitch, if you haven't qualified the prospect before, you could be wasting all of that time and energy. So this is something you have to do before you schedule a sales presentation. One of the important things you can do in the prospecting process, is, as I said before, is to collect as much information as possible about your prospect. You can store this information in a customer relationship manager. This is essentially like a Rolodex, but it's digital and it's searchable. And you can collect all sorts of information in there. It keeps track of client decisions, inventory, contact and meeting information, customer behavior, personal information about your customers. If you figure out what their personality type is, you can include that in here. If you figure out what their family situation is like, all of that information is useful because it establishes a relationship and it keeps it alive. If you have tons and tons of clients as a salesperson, it's very useful to have some notes on your particular buyers. Once a prospect has been qualified and the information has been gathered, then you have to schedule a sales presentation. You need to be assertive, but you want to leave enough time, and you want to quickly and amicably end the prospecting call as soon as possible. Once they've scheduled a meeting, you don't want to stick around and linger because there's always a chance that you'll put them off. Some tips for prospecting. Confidence is contagious. If you're confident in your prospecting call, that's going to make your prospective client confident about you and about the conversation that you're having. People could hear a smile. If you're meeting in person, obviously smile. But if you're on the phone, you also want to smile because people can hear it through the phone. There's been all sorts of studies to say that people can really sense that even when they're not able to view you. Practice makes perfect. The first few sales calls you do might be terrible. The more you try it and the more you adapt what you do to the situation, the easier your life as a salesperson is going to be. You want to revise everything you do. When something doesn't work, don't try it a million times. Move on and try another path. And then you want to develop a very thick skin. You'll get a lot of rejections. If you can't handle rejection, you're going to have a real hard time in sales. Prospecting is just the first step in the sales process. Like I said, most companies and salespeople do it continuously, but it fits right at the beginning. So we can look here at the sales process itself. Prospecting comes at the beginning. You're going to have your lead development, qualification of prospects, and information collecting. Those go hand in hand, and then scheduling a sales call. Then you have the sales call or sales presentation itself. You're going to have an approach. You're going to do a formal presentation, and then you're going to close and try and make the sale. And then there's some post-purchase actions as well, where you're usually collecting new information, but also maintaining client information and how it's changed. You're going to do some follow-up, you're going to do some customer service, and you're going to maintain that relationship over time to make sure that your customer becomes a client and continue to buy from you over time. The sales process incorporates all the activity that salespeople conduct between the initial and the final customer contact. So salespeople do a lot of jobs aside from just that sales presentation. They do prospecting, they do the presentation itself, and they do a lot of post-purchase actions. And sometimes that's shared among different team members. It's not all done by a single person. It can be short or long, the sales process, depending on the sale. When prospects choose to buy a product, they become a customer, as I said, and then when customers become regular buyers, they're often considered to be clients. And we want to have clients. It's very good to have people come back to you because it means that they've established a relationship that they want to maintain. Clients entail a longer sales process than customers, and customers require a longer sales process than those who've never made it beyond the prospect phase. Obviously, when you go and you meet a client, you don't have to go through quite as much in terms of explaining the product, but there's a lot of maintenance that goes in over time. And maintaining those relationships is really key to a successful sales career. All right, so that's it. Make sure you know all of the terms before moving on to the module assignment and eventually the exam.